I'll start. I'm Marie Smith Olesen, in fact. I work at the Danish Film Institute at a development training scheme called New Danish Screen. I've done that for 3 years prior to that as a film commissioner. Prior to that, I was a producer here in Scotland, so some of you might recognize me a bit. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dillon. I work for the Irish Film Board. I work as part of the production and development team. I suppose the Irish Film Board, similar to Creative Scotland, we are the National Agency for Film in Ireland, so we support the development, production and distribution of film, and we also promote Ireland as a film location and our tax credit.
Thank you. My name's Anna Mancy. I'm Head of Certification at the BFI, and we are responsible for certifying films, high-end television programmes, animation television programmes, children's television programmes and video games to access the respective UK creative sector tax relief. So I'll be talking about the tax relief particularly for film, but if you want to come and see me any time during the day, I can talk to you about any of the tax reliefs.
And my name is Agnieszka Moody. I work with Anna at the BFI, looking after the participation of the UK audiovisual professionals in the EU funding programme Creative Europe, which many of you might know under its previous guise, the media programme. If you haven't noticed, we've been called Creative Europe for nearly 3 years, but it's the good old programme offering grants for development, production, distribution, promotion, you name it, there is a funding scheme. Out of the BFI, we run one of the offices. There's another office here in Glasgow at Creative Scotland, where my colleague Emma Valentine, who many of you know, works. Emma's couldn't be with us today, so I'm just standing in for a work colleague. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So, European co-productions, if I could start with you, Sarah. Irish film is having a major moment right now, and at Sundance there were, I think I counted 6 Irish films, 7. And I myself, as a producer, I have one Irish co-production underway and another one on the table right now. So it just seems like Ireland is, a really open country for European co-production. Can you speak a little bit about your impressions of that and how Ireland works with European producers?
Yeah, we're obviously a very small country, so we, by the very nature of that, have to co-produce. Pretty much every film we do above about 1.2 million has to be a co-production, an international co-production. We have worked with, I'd say, pretty much every territory going at this stage. For example, Room was a Canadian-Irish co-production. The Lobster had about 5 partners, I think.
The UK was involved, the BFI Film Fund.
UK, Ireland, Greece, France, and I think Luxembourg.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And Brooklyn was a UK-Irish-Canadian co-production. So, yes, we co-produce quite heavily. And in fact, it's been very, very beneficial, I think, to Irish films as well. Both Irish producers working as minority co-producers on projects, but also as the leading producer. We've found that creative collaboration in terms of talent and production skills has actually managed to elevate Irish filmmaking substantially as well. So this wonderful dialogue goes on between filmmakers and producers, but also between the different agencies involved as well. And we've got very kind of strong reciprocal relationships with our other funding agencies across the world now at this stage. But certainly I think that has helped Irish film get out to much wider audiences, and I think that's the challenge, I think, as well, being a small nation, an English-speaking nation who are competing against the studio system as well. It's how do you get your films seen, how do you get them financed? And I think co-production has been the way that Ireland has managed to do that over the last... But it's not something that's happened overnight. I mean, it's probably been going on for the last 10 years. I mean, when Simon Perry joined the film board, he very much kind of engendered this system of co-production, and I think it's and again, the success for Irish film is not something that's happened overnight either. I think it's been coming, it's through kind of blood, sweat and tears over kind of the last 10-15 years,
Sure. And so when you've got a film like The Lobster, which has so many different partners, I mean, if I could come to you, Anna, how do you navigate that in terms of the different funds, the different requirements, the legislation required for each different partner. How do you get through that as a producer? What's your advice to people?
Well, I would always say make sure you get the application early, especially for the UK. You have to have, for co-production, you have to apply at least 4 weeks before principal photography begins, and especially if you're working with more than 2 or 3 partners, I would get it in even earlier than that and start talking to us if you're concerned about the structure, because we have to liaise with 5 different partners, and whichever is the country is the majority financial partner, we always defer to them to take the lead on the first decision. So if you're putting an application and we have to liaise 5 different ways, we have to make sure everyone's happy that it's meeting the rules of the European Convention, because traditionally if it's European co-production you're going to be using the European Convention, and each country has its own way of deciphering and interpreting the treaty as such. Generally we have very good relationships, especially with Irish Film Board, with France and Germany, but sometimes Greece was a country that we hadn't worked with for a long time. We don't do as much co-production now as we used to do because our film tax relief changed in 2007. Prior to that we did a lot of co-production, and we're beginning to see it pick up again, as we was saying about Brooklyn, Lobster. We've put into all those films. But yeah, just talk to us as soon as possible. Make sure you know that each country has to have a financial contribution and a creative filmmaking contribution that's broadly in proportion. And that, in terms of the UK co-production side, it's, when we're assessing it, it's different to the assessing your tax relief. So for the tax relief, it's about where money is used or consumed. For the co-production assessment for us, it's just if it's UK expenditure, regardless of where it's taking place, it goes in the UK column. So if your director's British, it will go in the UK column, even if you're filming in Ireland, for example.
Agnieszka, I see you nodding and looking like you want to...
Just because the question was about how you navigate this. So the media program of Creative Europe is all about making us all work across borders together. We want to treat Europe as one territory with 500 million audience. So how do we facilitate that? In our funding schemes, we encourage co-production, and it's always good to say that the project that you are developing is going to be a co-production. The more evidence you can provide for that, the better. Lobster is one of the examples, Brooklyn is another. The projects have to make a case for themselves that they aim for international market beyond their domestic territory. So that's one. That's making producers think about this world beyond their borders very early at the script stage. Is there an audience for this material outside of my country? So that's through the development scheme. But even earlier, people might be aware in this room already about international training programs that do exactly that. There's one course you can go to Berlin to actually deconstruct in detail complex European co-productions. That's all there is to it. There's 3 or 4 days when several people who are, sleeves up deep in it, they come and share their experience and say exactly how they've put together those 16 funding sources. So that's Erich Pommer Institute, one of the training providers we fund. That we absolutely recognize that it's a very complex landscape and you are not born with all those skills to put together co-productions. So there are places across Europe to learn how to do it. EAVE would be another course that people might be familiar with, which is, again, facilitating for producers to work together. And it's not just the skills that you get, it's the partners. Because once you go through that experience, you actually do make friends with people and you realize who you would be able to work with, who you're going to trust. It's a people's business. So there's plenty of those on offer, and we are there to also advise you on which one to take at which stage in your career. They're usually very vocational. They are good to take your project with to the course, because the real development, real putting of it together will happen as part of the training. I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely, and since we're with you, can you say something to CAM anybody who's intending to submit an application to Creative Europe, because when it was named media, certainly it always put a shiver up people's spines when you thought about your media application and how long in advance you should start preparing it. But maybe you could just say a little bit about the whole initiative and demystifying any concerns about that.
Okay, well, that's a tough one, because we all know that it's beautiful money when it lands in your account, because it's non-repayable and nobody's there to watch over you. Pretty much, it's easy, but it's hard to get, and it's slow to get, and there's a form to fill, and more recently it's become even harder because of how Denmark's not allowed to nod here. because in Brussels I
was wearing my producer hat.
Because I'm going to talk about the big countries, that it's become harder to receive this money if we are based in big countries. In the past, we were getting a lion's share of the European pot between UK, Germany and France. And we've been caught, we've been seen, and producers from other countries said, could we have a bit more of that pie? And the Commission listened. So now it's even harder for us to get those grants, because there's automatic rigid points that we will never get, and producers from smaller countries will. So we need to try a bit harder. What can make a difference is if we are co-producing. It's not a requirement, but it's a strong encouragement. So anytime co-production will win over non-co-production. We like to see also films for children. That's another extra few points you would get if you happen to be developing films for children. There's a few things that can help. What's also happened, which is, I think it's slightly perverse, but maybe it will change, that it used to be that single project, our money for just one project, was easier to get than slate funding, which is several projects in one go for more established companies. With those restrictions on geography, it's almost become the other way around now, that single project is so widely open and so hard to get that it's nearly not, it's very difficult to get this. Slate funding is difficult to access because you have to have a certain experience for it. But once you're in, the success rates are better. So I think that's the message that I'm quite happy to spread, because unless we see better success rates in single project, it's really become quite difficult.
Our American colleagues in independent film, I mean, they look over at Europe, with great envy when they see the sort of patchwork of different incentives and what have you. If I could come to you, Marie, in terms of Denmark, can you talk a little bit about the extent to which you encourage co-productions and what should producers do to be successful, I suppose, in their applications to DFI?
Where do you start that? It's like you're suggesting as well, and saying it's all about the relationships. You need to have a Danish production company, for instance, to access co-production funding in Denmark, which is both going for feature films and documentaries. And those relationships, yes, it's about fostering those good and long-lasting relationships. But don't always assume that's just going to be easy peasy, because you might have a great time in the bars and, or the festivals, it's just great. All of a sudden it's reality. So we encourage people to really try and keep earlier in the process, to get a deal memo in place, to actually really hammer out how do we do this in the best way. Also to be quite aware of the sort of bumps you'll meet along the way, because they will be there, and who then sits with the responsibility if the lead producer in another country actually is not taking responsibility and actually might not be agreeing on certain things that are quite critical to the creative choices that are being made, or the financial sort of difficulties, and who shares the bad debt and all that stuff, blah blah blah. So it's just yes, of course, go into it with all the positive and good energies you can muster, because you need them, and they're very, very important for the creative processes. Because that's one thing to remember, that although they are, of course, seen as sort of fictitious vehicles, you know, to get more money into production, great. But it is also about the creative aspects of it. I mean, to get co-production from Denmark, really, it is assessed, as I assume it will be in most countries, as much on a creative basis as on the sort of more financial and technical basis. You know, how do we make the figures add up? So they are being assessed with dual sort of force, if you like. The things that are being looked at is, for instance, what type of talent. There's a 60% spend of what Denmark can allocate, which is between what is it now? 350 up to, oh God, this euro thing. I'll do it in pounds. It's between sort of 100k and 200k that you can access on for the features, or less. You know, some films need less, and for a reason, because what you have to get is the Danish talent. Could be a DOP, it could be editors. There's a lot of post that goes to Denmark. If it's location based, of course, if you're considering filming around anywhere in Denmark, there are regional funds to access. There's a Copenhagen Film Fund that's now, for instance, just going into partnership with Southern Sweden Commission. So there are lots of sort of other incentives not to dismiss, because they work really well in a finance plan. If you're going to film in Jutland, unlike the Danish girl, which was filming, was it in Ireland for those, was it Scotland? No, but it's sort of funny when you are Danish and you see Vejle Fjord, and it's like totally not in Denmark, and everybody is peeing themselves because it's sort of funny.
We get that. We've had that a lot over the years. Yes.
Yeah, but anyway, so it's just to have that, to have some really good creative sort of forces in there, because we will look at that. Documentaries can get up to £50,000 for a co-production. Really what we're also looking at is exactly, just to come back to my starting point, is what will people get out of this relationship on the long term. And of course some relationships don't even last till that end of production, because things go pear-shaped. However, it is really about, when we look at applications, this is not the main thing I do, but I have been sitting on I have been a reader and have been assessing co-productions. You really look at the individual companies, both in Denmark but also abroad, and sort of, who are these partners and what is it they're trying to tell us that they are getting from each other? Not necessarily just now, you know, how is the career path progressing? How can individual talent, not necessarily just in Denmark, but also in Mexico or France or Britain, you know, how can they, can we see a path, you know, are they interested in that, or is it really just a money
so it's about exercise? Being very strategic in your thinking, and not just, you know, thinking I can run around Europe and smash and grab bits of money here and there, and you need to be able to see a sort of strategy behind that, and beyond just that one project as well.
Definitely. Yep. I mean, really just, you know, what can we learn in Denmark? Yeah, we are a small country, you know, I hate that term, but that is what we are. We can't really escape it. But, you know, so how can we be influenced by other people's sort of film cultures, you know, and ways of doing things, just excel in that, you know, and how can our talent get better?
I just wanted to add, so obviously I'm dealing with tax relief, so I'm very much looking at the technical side of it, but the BFI Film Fund, they do international co-production, and it's very much a similar process where they're looking at the creative, and again there's obviously other sources of finance in other, you know, Creative Scotland, Film Agency Wales, again, if it's a good fit. So it's very similar in that respect when my department's separate from the Film Fund, but they have that when they're going to put money in things like Lobster and Brooklyn, they're looking at it in exactly the same sort of way.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was about to ask you about Lobster, which was, I think, one of the first film to access the BFI minority co-production funding with IFB. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and what what the pitfalls were along the way, and.
Well, The Lobster, I suppose, is kind of unique in many senses. It was developed by Element Pictures, who are an Irish company, and they very much pride themselves on working with, I suppose, author directors. I suppose Lenny Abramson being kind of a stakeholder in the company as well. And they had gone out and they had been kind of looking for various European directors to work for. And obviously, Yorgos had made Dogtooth and Alps, and they actually had started developing another project together on the slate called Balance of Power. And Yorgos, who's this mad creative genius, had come up with the idea of The Lobster. And I think it came together quite quickly. They took it to Rotterdam, which is a good idea actually to kind of try your stuff out, is to kind of get to some of the various co-production markets, whether it be the production finance market in London or Rotterdam or EFM in Berlin. It's a great way to kind of test your project. And it kind of did really, really well there and kind of caught everyone's attention. I suppose everyone was waiting to see as well what Yorgos would do, what his first English language project would be. And from there, the board came in, then the International Fund. I mean, from my understanding of the BFI International Fund as well, it's very much aimed at those kind of tentpole auteur directors from Europe that may be kind of moving into English language territory for the first time. And it came together quite organically there. And quite quickly, actually. Colin came onto the project quite quickly, and from there, the financing kind of fell into place.
But it is unusual to have a COPRA with so many countries, and that it worked very well. So it's a good example to look at, and you can do this.
I think for kind of smaller budget films, I think the relationship thing is critical actually, because often the projects that we see that maybe don't work the best are those ones that have literally gone out and done this kind of scattergun approach and pulled in lots of tiny bits of money from maybe 2 or 3 different sources of funding. And sometimes they can be a nightmare because, I mean, on the practical sense, it adds costs to your budget. You incur more travel and subsistence, you incur more deliverable costs, so there's a practical element to that, but also, you have to understand, there's the creative intent there as well. And I think your director often has to very much buy into the process, because he may be being asked to work with a Danish DOP, and he may have to cut the film in Finland with a Finnish editor. So they may need to be very much part of that process as well, and they need to buy into that. And that's a very delicate thing to negotiate, I think, as a producer as well. So therefore, your collaborators are extremely important. So you need to look at the project practically and go, okay, my budget is this much. Does it make sense for me to co-produce with 1 or 2? Does it feel organic? And often we get, a lot of films where they go, well, we're going to make a character Irish and we're going to name him Seamus. And I'm sure you get that here a lot as well. And actually, it's not London, it's Dublin. And, you see these things being frantically rewritten. And, immediately your kind of heart, you automatically want them to work because you think, okay, this might work. But more often than not, it's trying to, jam a square peg into a round hole. So I think you have to know your project, know your director, know what really works, and then put a team around yourselves into that cocoon, because it's hard enough to make a film. But, when you're adding all these extra stresses onto it, yes, it can work wonderfully. And actually the relationships that you can make, we have companies in Ireland like Fastnet Films who work with Wrinkle Films in the Netherlands all the time. They've developed these evolving relationships, and Wrinkle, they'll do minority on one and they'll take the lead on the next one, and this is real reciprocal relationship, and that's blossoming all over Europe as well. I mean, Final Cut for Real are a company that do that all the time with their docs. So again, it's about finding those collaborations that work for you as well, but also kind of going into it with your eyes open at the very beginning and not thinking, oh, I'm just going to grab kind of soft money funds from here, there and everywhere, because it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. And most countries would have a spend ratio, and then you have to find the right crew, and sometimes these Europods, the film suffers ultimately at the end, and that's usually narratively it suffers. So I think you just have to, really, it has to be the right project, and you have to go into it, with a very strategic plan. But it can be done, and it can be done at kind of varying budget levels. We've got involved in very low budget films as well that have been done as European co-productions, as well as the bigger budget prospects.
I think it's one of those reasons why initiatives like EAVI or ACE, Inside Pictures, all those drinks events that you think are just a swally when you go to film festivals, you're actually making relationships with people who will potentially be your partners for a very, very long time.
And also, I think you want to partner with a producer that's going to bring. So, you know, if you take a look at yourself and go, okay, I maybe don't have great relations with sales and distributors, so I want to partner with a Danish producer that can introduce me to kind of a couple of, or maybe they have very strong relationships with Sundance or Cannes, and you kind of go, well, maybe this film is a Sundance film, so I'm going to partner with someone who I know, one, is aesthetically on the same page as me, but two, can maybe, open some doors that way. So it's about kind of looking at that as well.
And producing's a lonely endeavour,
Very
apart from anything else. We tend to be, unless you're involved in television drama, you tend to be very, small companies, owner-operators. And you can't really make a film with one producer. You need at least 2, maybe 3, and I think that's a crucial part of it as well, isn't it?
We often get asked for, can we introduce people to, international people will email us and ask us if we can introduce them to UK co-producers. And this happens with our in the film fund as well, Isabel, who runs the international co-production fund. We can't actually put you in touch with people, but what we always do is recommend is you look at the British Council website of films and co-production films that you think are good, and look at the names of the people, and then when you're going to the festivals and those networking events, take note of that. And that's probably a good suggestion about how you can meet people with similar, you might have a similar sort of project in mind, and they're the ones that you should look at.
It's also, I think, about improving your status. If you look out for those companies that are making successful co-productions and go to them, they will help you make wider relationships, really. Anna, Switzerland has just announced a rebate. Ukraine has one coming in May, apparently. We do have our own production growth fund here, which is a relatively new fund, which we're hoping will show some economic, development in terms of attracting films to Scotland that wouldn't otherwise have come here. How, in the midst of all of these different incentives and rebates and funds, how does the UK manage to compete with that and still bring people here and attract people here?
I think, we've got excellent services, we've got excellent crews. I think internationally, we all have our own incentives. We're all signed up to a European directive where you have to keep your incentives within certain parameters because we're all members of the European Union. So I think competitively, as Europe PLC, it's actually quite helpful that we work together, and especially for things like European co-production, it demonstrates how actually you can all benefit. The UK can benefit, in other countries they have tax relief, so when you're doing a co-production, each producer's benefiting. I think the difficulty then is more actually international incentives, so Canada, Australia, and because we have such good crew and services in the UK, and we can demonstrate that even in the high-end television arena as well. There is always that thing when people come, international projects come to the UK, or they want to be in Pinewood or just outside of London. With high-end television, there was the high-end television tax relief, which was introduced in 2013. It doesn't have to be. They don't have to be based central London. They're quite happy to go outside. Outlander was filmed up here. And it's good to have that spread across the UK. And, Game of Thrones in Belfast as well has been fantastic for Northern Ireland.
And Marie, if I could ask you, in terms of your specific role at the DFI, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that and about how, from a new talent point of view, how are you both finding European new talent and also supporting Danish new talent to work with European co-producers?
Well, that's a sort of a slight difficulty in that, but I'll explain. What we have talked a lot about, when we do co-productions, is it's not necessarily the best thing and the most sort of beneficial thing to if you're a new talent to go into co-production. Often that could be one of the reasons why co-production is not taken forward if the talent doesn't feel it's strong enough as a director, even if it's not a Danish one. New Danish Screen, we don't co-produce as such. Having said that, we do end up getting lots of bits and money from here and there, but it has to have there shouldn't be any editorial limits to any. Nobody should have a say if it's a distributor, if it's a broadcaster, if it's another film fund. They should just be observing the process, if you like. That's our way of trying to protect the talent. New Danish Screen is for directors, producers, writers who want to really professionalize themselves. So we make people's first feature, for instance. That's a big focus for us. And don't always, people come often with bigger budgets than what we can provide. We can fully finance. That's a fantastic thing.
Wow. Yeah, that is amazing.
And that's also, I know it's sort of unique, but it really is the sort of thought behind that from its initial date, which is 11 years ago, is that it really was to try and make people follow that vision. And then for us as consultants, film commissioners, to sort of really work closely with a team or with an individual, look at what they've done before as creatives, what's really good here, what could actually become your trademark, if you like. How can we help strengthen that? How can we help wrap this individual or this core team? We love to think of this creative triangle. How can we wrap that in a way with other creatives and professionals so that they can help each other find their better selves, as filmmakers, and really take it seriously, rather than, of course, spending all the time financing or sort of, so they have this money in Sweden, great. All of a sudden, his name is Lucas and not Benny or whatever. So it's that kind of thought behind it. But of course, the reality of that is that I'm sure that will change soon as well, because it's a luxury that even still existing welfare states like Denmark probably will not be allowed to afford. Although it's a sort of film law, we are guided by a film accord that's renewed every 4 years, and we have all the political parties, even from the Danish Folks Party, which is sort of a very right-wing. Don't get me started on that. All the political parties agree to spending a lot of money every year on making films.
They do, don't they? We look very enviously at Denmark because you're a similar-sized country to us, and just because the number is so nice, will you tell everybody how much money you've got to spend in Denmark on film?
Yeah.
Is it 60
really.
million euro? You have 60 million euro.
It's about 50 million euros. That's including the wrappings, it's the educational programs, festival marketing, positioning of a film from early days. We work with distribution and marketing department from early days when we know the film is going forward. Yeah, so about 50 million euros. The whole budget of the Film Institute is about 60 million euros. That's for, the infrastructural costs.
You can fly to Copenhagen direct from Glasgow, actually. So
I'm on the second floor in the corner.
Yeah,
I just have a little box.
Amazing.
Just open it.
Yeah, but you mentioned, that they're, like every country, everybody is under pressure. Public money is always under pressure. And it is it's not a luxury. It's a cultural requirement, I guess. If we want, as European filmmakers, if we want to have film industries in our countries, what are the threats that you see in your own territories with regards to your financing and going forward? Ireland actually just recently. You always go the opposite way, don't you? Put your money up.
Well, no, our funding has dropped. The Film Board's funding has dropped quite radically.
The rebate's gone up, sorry.
Yes, our tax incentive changed 2 years ago. It was introduced in 2015.
Yeah.
Well, it's not 2 years ago, sorry, it's a year and a half ago.
Last year.
And it moved to much more of a tax credit system, very similar to the UK tax credit. And there you can get up to 32% of your eligible spend. So, they maintained a lot of the kind of positive things about the previous scheme, where it's kind of a first day PP payment. You can get up to 90% up front on first day PP, and it took us a little while to iron out some of the kinks, but it's now running very, very smoothly. And it works very complementary actually with the UK system we're finding, which is great. But in terms of, I mean, our funding comes yearly directly from the government as well, and we have found it. We've had a kind of almost like a 50% cut in the last kind of 7 or 8 years, in line which is in line with what has happened with our economy, I suppose. So now the pressure has really been put back on to the government to kind of up our funding levels again. We've got about 11 million a year. This year we've 11 million, and of that we reserve about 1.5 for minority co-production. We have about 6.5 million that we put up for Irish production. We do development, distribution, shorts. Everything else comes out of the rest of the pot. So it gets spread quite thinly. But in a good year we would probably do 12 Irish features, 5 co-productions. And then we probably do about 8 or 9 documentaries, and we also do TV animation as well. So we do about 6 kind of TV animated projects, 6 or 7 in a year.
It was just to say we don't have any tax incentives in Denmark. That might be good to know. We have about just over 2 million in total for documentaries and features to co-produce per year. The deadlines, 3 deadlines a year, and I have some folders I'll put somewhere if people want to check that out. Otherwise, everything is online. Also, this notion of familiarizing yourself with who have actually co-produced, what titles. It's always a good thing to know what people have done before you approach people. Also, you can do that after that you've been to the pub with them, but do know what they've done and who they are, what make them tick. It always helps to have that in terms of getting it to the final bit.
And Anna, in terms of the UK tax credit, how robust is that going forward?
I think based on the fact that since it was introduced in 2007, and then they've in 2013 they added 2 more tax reliefs. Then 2014 we finally got the games tax relief, and then last year they introduced the children's television one, and they're all modelled on the film tax relief. The rate of relief is the same. The government really does like the tax reliefs. They can see the economic benefits in terms of jobs and value to the economy. So I certainly don't think the tax relief will be going away. And they've enhanced certain areas of the film tax relief. So they've in 2014-15 we amended our cultural test in terms of single UK projects, so that there's more points are available for visual effects spend. So I don't. It's not going to go away. They, and again, both sides in the government really do see the benefit of them. In terms of the BFI funding, and I might need Agnieszka's help, it's about 20 million, Ben's fund, and again, it's split between distribution, production funding, development, various specific schemes and skills.
And is that figure guaranteed? Is that on a yearly basis, or is it guaranteed for a certain number of years, or?
Well,
I think it'll be a number of years. I mean, obviously, again, it's from the government. It's the lottery funding, and some of that also goes out to our regional partners as well, doesn't it?
But we can probably do a little plug-in on the new strategy, because we are sort of running to the end of our 5-year plan, which is including 2017.
Yeah, so we did Film Forever, and potentially we're now looking at sort of ramping up for the next year, the next strategy.
So how to spend the money? Let's not worry about whether it's going to be there, but the long-term plan is now just about to be consulted with the industry, and I think maybe somebody knows about there's some pre-consultation already happening this week, I think.
There's a BFI consultation tomorrow, actually, in Glasgow. I'm going to. Can you ever see a scenario in which, and maybe the fiscal makeup of the UK doesn't allow this just now, but we look at Canada that has a federal tax credit and a fantastic system of provincial tax credits where each part of the country competes to drive people. We kind of have a bit of that here with the Yorkshire Film Fund and other sort of pockets of money. In Scotland, we used to have an amazing, very micro little fund in Dumfries and Galloway. There was a very forward-thinking individual in the council there who I think put something like or he argued for a couple of £100,000 to be put into film in Dumfries and Galloway, and almost every Scottish filmmaker, and any UK filmmakers who were coming to Scotland, we would always drive them to, take them to Dumfries and Galloway. And I remember him telling me that for the investment of a couple of £100,000, that part of the country ended up getting a benefit of millions, about £4 million over, 1 year. And it's just such a no-brainer. It seems to me surprising that we don't see more parts of the country, of local authorities, councils competing with each other to try and, attract people to come to that area, and sort of have some kind of version of that provincial and federal system that they have in Canada.
There's been something similar, but this is on video games in terms of Dundee. I mean, I'm quite new to video games. We've only been doing it for a couple of years, but Dundee, they had a fund scheme there, and it's been really helpful. I think it's the University of
Abertay.
Abertay. They had a very small part, and it's been. Video games is very different to film. There's clusters all around the UK where, there is a tendency with film that it can be centred around London. Obviously, there are film companies across the UK. But from my point of view, the tax relief is available across the UK. I think we need to do more to promote it outside of London, and we're trying to do that. We're going to come up over the year. We're going to do road shows for the tax relief and promote it more.
I think it's really important for people to understand as well that, the BFI is a UK fund, and
absolutely.
Although you're based in London, it's very much about producers all over the country getting in there, getting to know the BFI, and getting on your radar really. Yeah. I think we've got some time for questions actually, so I would like to open it up to the floor. Anyone got a question? Yep, at the back. Do we have a mic? The person at the back.
Is there going to be any effect from the referendum, and if that's people vote to get out of Europe, how will that affect funding?
Before? Okay, here we go. Here we go. That's
go on, Agnieszka.
Okay, so in the most subtle way, I'd like to say that those two things are linked. As being members of the European Union means that we pay this horrendous check every year, whatever it is, 50 million a day, according to UKIP and things like that. Some of it comes back as Creative Europe's money to British professionals. So just to make that subtle point. And then, on a slightly more serious note, should the answer be no, it will take some time to dismantle the whole shop. So I wouldn't worry, certainly not about this year's budget, because we certainly paid to this year's budget. And people use the kind of period of 2 years as a period when things will die down if they have to die down. My own instinct is that the program is agreed for everybody. So in Ireland, in Denmark, it's safe until 2020. For us, I think that I'll be surprised if there were no ways found to get us through till the end of the program with some emergency precautions taken. The big game, should the answer be no, would be about the UK within the program post-2020. Because there are countries that are not part of the EU and participate in the program. But it just clearly means that their governments agree to pay much smaller check so that it goes towards the program and then the countries can participate. So we might be calling on your voice in that matter, but not tomorrow. It will be certainly not before the referendum.
So just in winding up, if I could just ask you briefly to give us one single piece of advice, if you had one bit of advice to give people in the room who want to get their films made and want to access the opportunities in Europe, what would it be?
Starting with me? leave, go out, go to Rotterdam, go to Berlin. There are ways to fund those trips, get networked, because I think you are as good as your network, really, and it's all that we're saying. If you have friends in the right places, you will get things done. And there is the whole sort of matrix, landscape, jigsaw, you call it, of places to be. And we've seen it happen. It's really nice to almost like chart people's trajectories along that route. In particular, again, we're not talking much about other genres, but documentary, for example. It's a small kind of circuit of, I don't know, 30 plus commissioning editors in that many countries. But they're all there, and it will take you maybe 2 years to get to know them all, but then you do know them all, and you know how to work that world. Perhaps in feature film it's a bit bigger sort of pond, but it's you know, it becomes much more familiar after a while, but it is part of the job. You really need to get it done. I don't know if there's any particular local bursaries to do things like that.
Creative Scotland has market and festivals funding.
Exactly.
I think Glasgow
Use it
City Council.
to the limit.
Yep.
To the limit. Go to your local council. Sometimes there are less predictable routes to that financing. As long as you grow some kind of business, there is some money for a foreign mission or whatever it is. But that would be my advice, to just go and get networked.
Leave. Anna?
Go, come back. It's return ticket you need.
I'd echo everything that Agnieszka said. From a co-production point of view, understand how the European Convention works, and read the guidance notes, and make sure you have a good relationship with your other co-producing partners, that you're all putting in your applications at the same time. I'm obviously looking at it very much from a technical point of view. And if you don't understand something, ring us and talk to us. We're always happy to guide you through, and for meetings, and we're always at festivals, so you can come, and there's always one-to-ones available.
Sarah?
Well, I suppose it goes out saying that the script is Bible anyway, but I suppose choose your partners very carefully, you know, spend time, get to know them, you know. Again, you're kind of getting into bed together for a certain period of time, and hopefully it becomes a long relationship. So, you know, do choose well and choose wisely, and hopefully it all works out for the best.
And Marie?
Everything they say. But also, I mean, just as I said before, I think this be quite clear about the division of labor. Who's doing what, the responsibility for the creative part, for the more sort of technical or financial parts. Of course, you have to be able to do everything, especially as a producing partner. But having said that, just also be very, very clear about how you want to spend your time and why you're doing it, because it is adding cost, it's adding time, and also very frustratingly so, you know, really puts on, it becomes more expensive, full stop. But also, and by all means, go out. You know, the world is a big place. We need each other. We can learn from each other. All of us, even if you think you don't have much to contribute, you do. You have a view of the world that people need to hear about, and vice versa. Go out, and then don't forget who you are. Don't forget what's your speciality. Why are you in this business? What do you want to get out of it? Where do you want to be in 10 years? You know, always. And then write things down, and when it comes to the actual co-productions, have good deals, contracts. I know it sounds a bit boring and silly, but it's very important.
Make sure you get paid equitably for the money you are bringing to the table. I mean, it's quite a straightforward system, you know, and it should be. Oh, Agnieszka, yes.
Can I just say one more thing? When you go out there, be generous about other people's projects, because that's the whole thing. You might also come across not only great people to work with, but their projects might seduce you. And we're all globally after those best projects ever. What if it's not quite your project? Somebody else comes to you with something that completely blows you away. So I think those journeys might also result in spreading your net a bit further.
Yep. So get your frequent flyer cards applied for, and get out there. We're going to break for coffee now. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful people on the panel for sharing their